Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. It is Wednesday, which means it's the day where I answer your questions. That's right. It's the Ask Me Anything. And I've got a couple of really interesting questions this week. So this is, at least in my opinion, going to be a very fun, very interesting show. The first question is something, it was sent on the Facebook page for Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, which is facebook.com/Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, spelled the way you would normally think, not the weird sort of way that I spell it on Twitter. And the way I spell it on Twitter is PEAC, the number 3, capital VOL, and then IBERTY radio. So it's peace, love. It's that backwards love, like the revolution love. And revolution, you know, for those of you that were involved in some way in either the 2008 or the 2012 Ron Paul presidential campaign, you know the revolution logo, where the word love is highlighted and spelled backwards in revolution. So I sort of have that sort of thing in the Twitter hashtag that I use. So it's Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. It's all one word with the love spelled backwards. But that's not how it is on the Facebook. So, you know, wanted to make it easy for people to find it instead of, oh, well, no, you've got to spell this word backwards. But the Twitter hashtag that I use, and I put out, like every Monday, I'll put out the call for questions, and I always use the hashtag, and nobody really ever tweets with the hashtag other than me, and I do it basically so that I can find that one post, and I can just keep reposting the same post that's a call for questions. So somebody on the Facebook page posted the question, can you please explain the origin of the term drink the Kool-Aid? And, you know, there's actually a very interesting history about the term drink the Kool-Aid. And the story here, where I'm actually going to relay the information, is from Mental Floss. And Mental Floss, if you're not familiar, they do some really good stuff. I really enjoy the YouTube videos that they do, where it's like, you know, 21 unusual things about fill in the blank, or 50 something something fill in the blank. So it's basically a list show that they do on YouTube, but they're really interesting, or at least people that like lists. If you despise lists, then you will hate the Mental Floss YouTube channel, but they have a lot of good information. So the story here from mentalfloss.com, this is not a YouTube video, this is an article that they've written. And they write, the phrase drink the Kool-Aid is common in American business and politics. Roughly translated, it means to blindly follow, and it usually has a negative connotation. And I will explain that a little more in depth with an article from the Washington Post, where they say, like, you know, the term drink the Kool-Aid should be, like, you know, banished from the English language because it's negative. The story here from Mental Floss, though, continues, iPhone buyers waiting in lines for days have drunk Apple's Kool-Aid, so to speak. But where did the phrase come from, and what does it even refer to, and does it refer to the correct beverage? We're going to have to go all the way back to the 1950s to answer the question. Before we get to the Kool-Aid part, let's recap some horrible American history. Jim Jones was a complex man. Long story short, he was a communist and occasional Methodist minister who founded his own pseudo-church in the late 1950s called the People's Temple Full Gospel Church, known in short as the People's Temple. And yes, the omission of the possessive apostrophe is intentional, as the name apparently refers to the peoples of the world. While Jones called it a church, it was actually his version of a Marxist commune, with a smattering of Christian references thrown into the sermons/diatribes. The People's Temple was arguably a cult demanding serious dedication and financial support from its members. While Jones was a cult leader and ultimately a homicidal madman, There was one bright spot. Jones and his wife, Marceline, were strongly in favor of racial integration, and they adopted a bunch of kids from different racial backgrounds. In fact, they were the first white family in Indiana to adopt an African-American boy. Other adopted children included 3 Korean Americans, a Native American, and a handful of white kids. They also had one biological child. Jones called his adopted retinue the Rainbow Family, and he made a name for himself desegregating various institutions in Indiana. As the People Temple grew throughout the 1960s, Jones lost the plot of the whole Marxism thing and began preaching about an impending nuclear apocalypse. He even specified a date, July 15th, 1967, and suggested that after the apocalypse, a socialist paradise would exist on Earth, and where would this new Eden be? Jones selected the remote town of Redwood Valley, California, and moved the People's Temple and the people there prior to the deadline. As you may know, the end of the world came and went without a nuclear holocaust. In the following years, Jones abandoned all pretenses of Christianity and revealed himself to be an atheist who had simply used religion as a tool to legitimize his views. Jones said those who remain drugged with the opiate of religion had to be brought to enlightenment. The enlightenment of socialism. Oh, and Jones was also a drug addict, preferring literal opiates to his metaphorical ones. As media scrutiny increased and his political profile became more complicated, Jones became concerned that the People's Temple's tax-exempt religious status in the U.S. would eventually be revoked. He was also paranoid about the U.S. intelligence community, so in 1977, Jones again moved the temple and the people, this time into a settlement he had been building since 1974 in the South American country of Guyana. He named it Jonestown, and it was not a nice place. It occupied nearly 4,000 acres, had poor soil and limited fresh water, was dramatically overcrowded, and temple members were forced to work long hours. Jones figured his people could farm the land in this new utopia. It did not hurt that he had amassed a multi-million-dollar fortune prior to arriving in Jonestown. Though he did not share or even use the wealth, Jones himself lived in a small shared house with few luxuries. Again, let's make this really long story just a smidge shorter. U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown in November of 1978, investigating allegations of human rights abuses within the community. Ryan was accompanied by NBC News correspondent Don Harris, various other members of the media, and some concerned family members of Jonestown residents. While visiting Jonestown, Congressman Ryan met a little over a dozen temple members who wanted to leave. That number of defectors was actually quite low, considering the population of Jonestown, which was then over 900. And I'm going to skip down a good bit in the story when we come back after the break on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davi Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com, all major bookstores, and now available as an audiobook.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I will finish getting through the story about Jim Jones and how that connects to drinking the Kool-Aid and the origin of the term, as well as why you might not want to really use it. And the other question, and I might have to skip some of the info that I wanted to share to fit everything in the episode. But before I get back to answering the question, I want to make sure that I tell you about Survivor Max by Davi Barker. In Survivor Max, 11-year-old Max must survive the zombie apocalypse alone in New Hampshire. The slow-moving, non-thinking, lame brains swarm his home searching for living flesh. Max must apply his Porcupine Freedom Scouts training to plan his escape, but first he must prove that he's too smart to die. Look for Survivor Max on Facebook and Amazon, or read Chapter 1 for free at survivormax.com. That's survivormax.com. So, skipping down a good bit here in the story, where they talk about there was the Jonestown community. It was basically a giant commune run by Jim Jones, and a congressman went down with some media and some family members, and because they were concerned about human rights abuses, tried to get some people to leave. There were some people that did, but that number was very small. And then they write, while processing paperwork to help Temple members return to the U.S., Ryan was attacked by knife-wielding Temple member Don Sly, but the would-be assassin was restrained before he could injure Ryan. Eventually, the entire Ryan party, plus the group of Jonestown defectors, drove to a nearby airstrip and boarded planes, hoping to leave. But Jim Jones had sent armed Temple members with the group, and the Red Brigade opened fire, killing Ryan, one Temple defector, and 3 members of the media, and injuring 11 others. Those who survived fled into the jungle. When the murderers returned to Jonestown and reported their actions, Jones promptly started up what he called a White Knight meeting. That's night with an N, not a K. So it's not one of the, like White Knight riding in on a steed to save the day. He invited all Temple members, but this was not the first White Knight. On various occasions prior to the murders, Jones had hosted White Knight meetings in which he suggested U.S. intelligence agencies would soon attack Jonestown. He even staged fake attackers around Jonestown to add an air of pseudo-realism to the proceedings, though it's hard to imagine that such a small community would not recognize their own people pretending to threaten the temple. Faced with this hypothetical invasion scenario, Jones offered Temple members these choices: stay and fight, head for Russia, at the time it was the USSR, or head for the Guyana jungle, or commit revolutionary suicide. In other words, mass suicide as an act of political protest. On previous occasions when Temple members mock voted for suicide, Jones tested them. Temple members were given small cups of liquid purportedly containing poison and were asked to drink it. They did. After a while, Jones revealed that the liquid did not contain poison, but that one day it would. And, by the way, he'd been stockpiling cyanide for years, not to mention piles of other drugs. On the final White Night, Jones was not testing his Temple followers, he was killing them. After the airstrip murders, outside of Jonestown, Jim Jones ordered Temple members to create a fruity mix containing a cocktail of chemicals including cyanide, diazepam, also known as Valium, something that I can't pronounce, which is known as phenigrin, which is a sedative, and chloral hydrate, sometimes called the knockout drops, and most interestingly, Flavor-Aid, a grape-flavored beverage similar to Kool-Aid. And they say we'll get back to that, but I'm just going to skip ahead. So the term drink the Kool-Aid comes because of this mass suicide murder thing. And no, it wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor-Aid. So when people say drink the Kool-Aid, they're actually they're actually using the wrong term there. And I had to pause for a second because I was reading something where they talk here in the article about the Kool-Aid brand, and Kool-Aid was obviously a much better known brand than Flavor-Aid, and they talk a little bit about the history of Kool-Aid. I'll post the link, so if you want to read the entire article, you can do that. Let me jump over just momentarily to the Washington Post article, where they say the phrase drink the Kool-Aid is completely offensive. We should stop saying it immediately. The author here says, you've probably heard the expression, he drank the Kool-Aid. Ariana Huffington once used it to describe supporters of George Bush's economic policies. Bill O'Reilly said it of critics. In 2012, Forbes called it a top annoying cliche used by business leaders. And there's a problem, they write, with this flip of words, though. The expression was born of a nightmare. And yes, it was. But just because something, an expression came because something bad happened doesn't necessarily mean that you should never use the expression again. And I can't think of anything off the top of my head that was also born of, a natural, or not natural disaster, but, some sort of horrific incident. Although I guess the Monty Python thing, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Like, should nobody ever mention the Spanish Inquisition in a joking manner because it was a horrible thing? Should nobody mention the Crusades or make light of the Crusades or joke about the Crusades because hundreds of thousands of people died? I think that, that's a bad reason to not mention something or try to, turn a phrase with it. So let me, I'll just post this link in the show notes. You can read the article if you're interested in doing so. Let me now go to the next question, which was submitted via email from someone living in Pennsylvania. He says, hi, Darryl. Today, he sent this yesterday, but I'm just going to read it as is. He says, today, I would like to have voted on my local election, but because I'm a registered libertarian, I'm not allowed. What steps can I take to try to get this changed? While I'm neither a Democrat or Republican, I want to have a say in local politics. And then he says, I'm a resident of Pennsylvania, if that is of relevance. And this is something that actually interests me greatly. The whole idea of political primaries, where you have political parties that are essentially private organizations that then try to be a pseudo-public organization when they want the government to fund their selection process for their candidates. And it's not just Pennsylvania. There are several other states where they have this thing that they call a closed primary. And I'll explain the difference between a closed primary, a semi-closed, and some of the other options that people have in various places, and what this person can do, or at least try to do, to change the way things are happening there in Pennsylvania when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Opening a wallet is quick and easy, and for merchants, there are no transaction fees on the first $1 million worth of transactions. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com.
When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Now, before I get into what's a closed primary, what's an open primary, what's the difference, is there anything else other than those two, I promise I'll be able to fit all of this in. As well as, I'll tell you some other stuff about, like where you can find more info, etc. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They also take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on investing and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 850-478-5270 or online at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. So a closed primary, that's what they have in Pennsylvania and 10 other states. And that refers to a political party primary where only people that are registered members of that party on election day get to vote in that political party's primary. Independent voters, people that are registered with unqualified parties, people that say I'm undeclared or unaffiliated, well, whatever the term is in the state where you are. In Florida, they call it no party preference. In New Hampshire, it's called undeclared. I forget what the term is in Pennsylvania, but it's like unclassified or something of the sort. So if you're, anything that's not a member of any party, you don't get to vote in a primary. If you're a member of a minor party or a party that is not recognized as actually being a party, you don't get to vote in a primary. Only people that are registered members of the Republican and Democratic parties get to vote in the primary. And I contend that that's still allowing too many people to vote in a primary. And I'll explain my position after I explain some of the other things or other types of primaries. There's also what is called a semi-closed, where you have to be a registered member of the party, or you can be an independent / unaffiliated voter and be allowed to vote in the primary. Sometimes it, depending on the state, it's up to the party to decide who gets to vote in the primary. Other times, like in Pennsylvania, it's a state law that says that only people that are registered with the party get to vote in the primary. Then there's what is called an open primary. And while the term is used to describe primaries in certain states, I contend that there's not really such a thing as an open primary, because the way they describe an open primary, they being the people on Wikipedia who have come up with, one of the better definitions that I've seen, says a registered voter may vote in any party primary regardless of his or her own political affiliation. But what this actually does is again, I contend that it's semi-closed because you only get to select one party's ballot. If it were truly open, then you could party hop from race to race. And the only states that do that are the states that have these top two things to where only the top two candidates go on to the general election, and there's pretty much no independent or minor party candidates unless there's a race where they were the only person other than a single Republican or a single Democrat to have filed. So, yeah, there's not really, an open primary in the sense that you get to choose from each party or any party per race, and then you have many candidates on the ballot. So what can be done? And let me first go back and sort of state my position about why I think that a closed primary is still too many people involved in the process before I answer the question, because I don't want to tick people off. But I want to, explain my position. The reason I say that a closed primary, and actually any primary that uses taxpayer dollars, and I can understand the thing where you're, a registered voter and you're being forced to pay for this primary, why can you not participate? And there's really two things going on here. You have a private organization that says only our members can vote. But just because you're registered as a Republican does not mean that you are a member of the Republican Party. To actually be a member of the Republican Party and have a card that says, I'm a member of the party, you have to donate money directly to the Republican Party and say, I want to be a member. Same way, I have a card that says I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. That's because I've given them money, and they sent me a card that says I'm a member of the party. So I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. I think that only people who are actually members of a political party should be deciding who is the nominee of that party. So based on that, a closed primary is still too many people because you've got people that aren't actually members of the party that are making a decision for this private entity. But now comes the other problem to where taxpayers are being forced to pay for these private entities to decide who their nominees are going to be. So there's two things that are really the issue, and I'm going to try to hit both of them. There was a group of voters in New Jersey that filed a lawsuit against the state of New Jersey saying, hey, look, we're independent voters, although there were a couple of people in the lawsuit that had registered as either Republicans or Democrats. And they said, we only did this so that we could vote in the primary. We don't actually, belong to the party. We just want to vote in the primary. And that lawsuit actually got thrown out of federal court on the grounds that political parties have a right to say who does or does not get to vote in their primary. So going the lawsuit route isn't going to cut it, especially considering Supreme Court precedent saying that private entities have the right to decide who gets to be in their entity. So you can't go that route. What you have to do, if you really want to open this up, is try to find a legislator willing to introduce legislation to modify existing law. And again, this is something that, there are many facets to this. Do you simply want to say that independent voters get to vote in party primaries? Do you want to say that any voter can vote in any party's primary? Or do you want to say that any candidate that wishes to run in the general election can do that? And I think that would be a better solution, because even if in Pennsylvania you open it up and say that independent and minor party voters get to vote in major party primaries, Pennsylvania still has horrible ballot access laws that mean that in November you're still only going to have two choices. So what you need to do is find a legislator willing to work on modifying the laws. And I think that's the best course of action, because obviously the courts aren't going to give you what you want. This has been Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online, fppradio.com.